Welcome to the Fully Human Connections podcast. I'm your host, King, and I'm joined by my co-host, Reggie. How you doing today, Reggie?
I'm doing well, King. Good to be here.
Great to have you. And we have a special guest. We're joined by Master Certified Coach Leslie Williams. How you doing today, Leslie?
I'm great, thanks. And so glad to be here with you both.
Excellent. So, Reggie, you want to go ahead and introduce Leslie to our listening audience?
Yeah, sure. So I met Leslie first via email and then in person. She was one of my first teachers when I trained as a coach with Integral Coaching Canada, and I could go on just about the teaching for the whole hour, but I won't do that. And we've just become good friends, and I just admire her work and her insight, and that and you'll learn more about her as she begins to speak in this conversation. But we've known each other, I guess, since 2009 now. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, definitely glad to have you aboard, Leslie. One of the ways we normally begin our this podcast in particular is we start with saying our gratitude moments for what we're grateful for. And so each of us kind of go around and we share that. And I'll start. I'm grateful for my life, my health, my ability to see, hear, walk, talk, stand, breathe, and have sound mind. I'm grateful for that 24 hours to pursue my purpose in life, a roof over my head, a mother who's alive, sound mind, grateful spirit, and a good heart. And finally, I'm grateful for the infinite possibilities that this day is going to provide.
Yeah. Amen.
Thank you. Yeah.
Leslie, you want to go ahead or do you want me to jump in? I'm fine either way.
Go ahead, Reggie.
Yeah. So my standard is I'm grateful for indoor plumbing and a refrigerator with food in it, and everything that King said. But I want to get more specific, something very, very up to date. I had an upper endoscopy yesterday. Just checked my esophagus from some things, and everything was fine. But just want to be grateful for the two nurses, the one that greeted me and set me up, and the one that allowed me to stand up after the anesthesia wore off. And they were just so great. As much as I have some criticism of the larger approach to healthcare in the United States, the individual people that I'm fortunate to bump into were great, and I'm just really grateful for them. So that's my gratitude for today. And I'll pass the gratitude baton to you, Leslie.
I want to echo the healthcare gratitude. I have a client who is a nurse and a high-level executive in the Veterans Administration. And during COVID, I just reconnected with her after a long time. And during COVID, she said, I'm looking around at all that's happening to people, and I could sit here in my cushy executive office, and I thought, what am I doing? And so she rushed headlong into the fire of COVID care, and said, I just have never felt more called, more grateful. And I've thought about all the people that made that decision that she made, and are making that decision, that continue to make that decision, to make it possible for more of us to live out our fully intended lives. I'm also very grateful to all the forces, seen and unseen, that lead me to this conversation this morning, to lead me to be with the two of you this morning. And on a personal note, I would say I'm grateful for so much, but specifically my camera, which allows me to see the world in a reverent way, and is the basis of my spiritual practice. So today I'm appreciating that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Leslie and Reggie, thank you all for sharing your gratitude moment. I'm a firm believer, as Einstein has said, that everything is energy and energy is everything. And I believe when we start the day off with a moment of gratitude, it pretty much just sets the context and protects your mind from all the negative energy that's going to come at you throughout the day, and it kind of puts you in the right state to just deal with things in a very grateful and purposeful manner. So thank you for sharing that. And listening audience, I hope you all had an opportunity to think about your gratitude moments while we were sharing ours as well. And now we want to hand it off to Reggie to kind of set the context for us of where our discussion is going to be about today.
Yeah. So thank you, King. So The discussion centers on this new book that just came out. I love holding it up because it has my name on it. Healing America's Narratives, the Feminine, the Masculine, and Our Collective National Shadow, Becoming More Fully Human. And more specifically, today we're continuing our conversation about chapter 3 of the book, which is entitled Fear of the Feminine, the Subjugation of Women, and Getting Their Feet from Off of Our Necks. And as an asterisk next to that, one of the things I didn't say when I introduced Leslie was she read that chapter when it was in its early stages. I don't know, it could be a year ago. I'm not sure how long ago it was, and gave me some really good insight into what it succeeded at doing and what it might want to be, revised a bit in order to do better, which really made the chapter, really improved it in its final iteration. So I could say a lot more about Leslie in general, but I'll just begin this conversation with thanking her for her insights into that chapter. Yeah.
Well, Leslie, we want to give ladies first an opportunity to kind of see, since you've read the chapter, kind of what your thoughts are on its context and kind of lead our discussion today, if you wouldn't mind.
Great. There's so much to say about this book in general and this chapter. I think I want to start with just a deep bow of the rigor of your work and the fullness of it, Reggie, and the interesting places that you take us in exploring this whole question about the masculine and feminine. And the part that really resonated, I think, most strongly with me, that feels the most like the place that I live, is this whole issue of the integration of masculine and feminine, and this whole question about what does healthy and unhealthy masculine and feminine look like. So I'm very interested in getting into a conversation about, first of all, how do we bring things out of the shadow into the light so that we can see them? And then what is this thing called integration, and what does health look like? So those are the things that have been really driving my work with leaders. And maybe a bit of context about that. I'm an executive coach by profession, and very early on, I saw a pattern where women were coming to me, being sent to me, forced to work with me, mostly because they were exhibiting too much of the masculine. And so I started working on masculine feminine integration in women leaders. And then I started to learn, or started to see, that this feminine masculine integration, no matter what gender I was working with, no matter what context we were working within, at the foundation of it was almost always a masculine feminine imbalance that can manifest in a million different ways. And I think that's why Reggie so wisely points to the fact that this fear of the feminine and subjugation of women is not only a manifestation of our shadow as a country, but also potentially one of its causative factors, because the masculine and feminine polarity is the mother of all polarities. It's the basic force with which every one of us has to wrestle and navigate to find our fullness as humans. So I'll start there.
Yeah. Okay. Anything, or do you want me to jump in?
No, jump in, Reggie. I just get an opportunity to respond to that.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you for that. I love, thank you for just pointing to what you think the book does. And as usual, you're right. So Leslie, just kidding. No, I'm not kidding. But yeah, one of the things that I didn't say in the introduction, because there were so many ways to introduce you, was that, in the greater DC area, you've worked with just about every department in the United States federal government, and in a lot of corporations as well. And for those listening in, LeaderShift.net is where you can find out more about Leslie's work. Not the book, that somebody, stole the leadership from her. But leadershift.net is where you can find more about Leslie. But to the point, I mean, I really do believe that, and I discovered this during the writing. At the beginning of the writing, the words feminine and masculine were not in the title or the subtitle. And somewhere halfway through, I was beginning to see, or beginning to think I saw, as the book showed me where it wanted to go, that all of the examples of what I now am calling, the collective shadow, pointed to an overabundance or dominance by unhealthy iterations of the masculine, and a virtual absence or a very, very, very tiny presence of healthy iterations of the feminine. And just to clarify that, I mean, we can say a lot about those two. Masculine and feminine can manifest in healthy or unhealthy iterations. And so we're not saying the feminine is good and masculine is bad. We're not saying women are good and men are bad. We're saying that we need healthy iterations of the feminine energies and the masculine energies as we move forward. On display every night, and if we watch our news or we read our news or we get the news nowadays, whether you look at hard right or hard left news reports, and even some of them more or less in the middle, virtually all of them, not every single one, but virtually all of them manifest unhealthy masculine. It's us against them. It's individualism versus community. It's freedom at the expense of equality, I would say. There are different ways to say that. And to your point, Leslie, the real question, the real work, I believe, that has to be done is, it's nice to, bandy about the word integration when it comes to the masculine and feminine, but then how do we actually go about doing that? And, that's those of you who are listening have to read the last two chapters of the book to get into that. But I say that a little bit tongue in cheek, but I really do mean it, because it's not something that, oh, here's the feminine, here's the masculine, here's the healthy versions, let's integrate them. What does that really mean?
Yes.
So first you have to be aware of them. I'll just riff on this quickly. First, aware of what they are. Second, aware of how I embody the masculine and the feminine and how healthy my embodiments are. And then third, if I'm not fully integrated, and the odds are, if I'm a human being in the United States in the third decade of the 21st century, I'm probably not fully integrated. I mean, I wrote the book and I can point to my own flaws. I say I wrote the book, but I did, but I'm aware that my own work continues to need to be done. So awareness of what they are, to what extent do I embody them, and what is the work I need to do? Those are the high level steps necessary to begin to integrate masculine and feminine energies individually, because there isn't like this big collective American psyche that exists like a human being does. Our shadow is the result of the collection of individual shadows. And not everyone in the United States has the same shadow elements, but enough of us do that we have this collective shadow that denies this history of violence, subjugation, and greed, excess, and other things that I name in the book. So I'm going to put a period there for now because I blabbed a bit. Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. Thank you for that clarification, Reggie, because when I was listening to that, the engineer in me always like to put things in a process-oriented manner and kind of sum things up. So what I hear you saying to those three was, the words that jumped out to me was conscious, the awareness, then self-actualization, now beginning to see where you are within that, and then growth-minded, meaning now how do I go about integrating those forces, And now that I've read your book, I think about the fact that I look at everything now and I'm looking for the masculine and the feminine energy and everything I read, I watch, or whatever it is. And I find myself just kind of doing that automatically. And I just recently watched HBO documentary. It came out some years back, but I just finally got a chance to watch it. Chernobyl, about the nuclear power plant in Russia. And I know the book's about America, but I just want to talk about the masculine energy I saw there. It's like when you watch that, you can realize that all that could have been avoided had it had the integration of feminine energy. It was just purely the masculine energy dominating there. And you saw the consequences of the lack of feminine energy being involved at every level of that, from not only the accident that happened, but then the cover up and then the way that was handled. And it was just so, and you look at that from a level of how many people were impacted by that decision. So to me, that's really a great lesson learned to say, if we have too much of one energy, that could be detrimental to the entire planet because that was a nuclear power plant. So I just kind of wanted to throw that in there as an example of saying one-sided or being heavily sided and the consequences that can come as a result.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'd like to jump in terms of how I've come to think about that balance, because when we talk about the healthy masculine and the healthy feminine, we're still tending to separate them as if there's like a feminine channel over here and there's a masculine channel over here, and that I need to make them both healthy. Actually, what makes each of them healthy is the presence of the other. So if you think of the yin yang symbol, which yin yang is masculine, feminine is what it means. Receptive, agentic, that's what it's trying to capture. We all think that the big news is the black side of the paisley and the white side of the paisley. And what I've realized is the big news are the dots. That absent the dots, both of them go into unhealthy. So there's the unhealthy feminine. It's just that we haven't had the luxury of embodying the unhealthy feminine. It's in this country, it is demanded in the world that women exhibit a lot of the masculine, and then we vilify them for that. Right. So the women are on this razor's edge, which is so exhausting to navigate. But it's the same thing. The feminine needs some of the masculine energy for its health, for its very health. Likewise, the masculine needs the feminine for its health. And so when you talk about the unhealthy masculine, almost by definition, in my view, what you're talking about is that the size of the dot of feminine is either non-existent or too small. When I'm working with executives, their greatest fear is that I'm going to ask them to switch teams. So when people come to me and say, I'm terrorizing my staff and everybody goes running from the room, screaming, what they're afraid of is they associate unhealthy feminine. That's what they think of as the unhealthy feminine. So what you're asking me to do is be limp and without opinion, and you just want everybody to just run everything. And so they're terrified at even the suggestion of some feminine. And so when I'm working with heavily masculine energied leaders, whether they're women or men or transgender or gender fluid, it doesn't matter. Part of what I have to do is meet them where they are. And when the heavily masculinized clients come to me, they can't relax until I bring them heavy masculine energy. If I bring my softness, they freak because they're so afraid of the softness that they know they have to integrate in order to be more effective. Does that make sense? Am I making any sense?
It doesn't. If you're okay with this, I'd love to ask you, because you've given me a couple of examples in private conversation, can you give us a succinct example of what it might look like to bring the masculine to a hyper masculine person who's afraid of the feminine?
Yes. So I have two pretty quick examples. One is a senior male executive who just talked about all individual rights, his entire worldview. There was no we, there was no compassion. And I looked at him and I was like, I just said to him, you are a jerk. I didn't say it that politely. And we'd been tussling, we'd been warring for 6 meetings or so. And I finally was just like, wow, you are such a jerk. And then I saw him visibly relax, as if, oh, she can meet me. I don't have to be so afraid of her. And that moment was the moment where our work began. And then he was open. So that was one, is to just basically headbutt them. And then they feel met, and then they can relax. And then another one was a woman who was told to come work with me, and she was our first meeting. She was, I mean, as far back in the chair, in the room, everything folded. And she's like, I don't want to enter some women's ghetto here with this work. I don't want you to make me into a woman. I don't want to be weak. I'm good here because I'm strong. And so let's get in and let's get out. Just what do I have to do to check the boxes? And so I did 2 moves. I said, either we do something meaningful or I walk right now. So there's no box checking here. And then the second thing that I did was to say, tell me about your home life. And she stopped dead. And she said, oh, you mean the fact that my daughter leaves the room whenever I walk in? I go, yeah, that. And it just brought her up short that this feedback she was getting of being too tough and judgmental at work was traveling with her to the place that she cared about most. And from that moment, then she was able to say, okay, I'm ready to go to work.
Yeah, thank you for those.
Yeah.
Because I mean, from where I sit, I tried to be careful in the book and even in conversation, not to be too conceptual. And
Yes.
I mean, we need the concepts, but to be able to say, okay, this is what we mean by that. So I appreciate those examples. Yeah.
Thank you. And let me know if I'm being too conceptual. Keep doing that.
No, not at all. So,
Yeah.
King, anything coming up for you?
Yes. I'm curious to know that the first gentleman you spoke about, the executive who was more, that you referred to as a jerk. I'm curious to know that, did he seek you out? Because I'm just, as hiring a woman executive coach to coach him, or was he referred to you? I'm just curious to understand that process, because for him to kind of come at you and be that stoic, so to speak, in that context, what drove him to come to you and then finally open up when you came at him with that masculine energy?
Yes, it's a great question. Usually what has people come to me is some breakdown in their world. So usually it is that their organization has said to them, you need a coach. If I'm lucky, that breakdown has happened internally, where people will say, wow, I'm not getting the promotion I want, or I'm not having the impact that I want. So that's sort of an internal disruption. But in terms of how to things come out of the shadows, it's almost always a disruptive pushing forward of something that we didn't want to see before, where what I care about, I'm somehow not able to bring about, or what others care about, I'm not able to bring about.
And with the woman, because it seems that in those 2 examples you shared, they were both appeared to be very hesitant and resistant to even receiving feminine energy at all.
Yes.
What they define in their minds as feminine energy.
Yes, which they immediately equated to unhealthy feminine energy. They didn't see any possibility of what the healthy feminine could do with that for them.
And just quickly, Reggie, just to set the context, so anyone who's new to listening to the show, Can you define again the difference between the masculine energy and the feminine energy based off what you've written in the book?
Yeah. So traditionally, the masculine energy, and again, we're not speaking about men, men, biological women, or any, specifics of gender fluidity or, transgender individuals. We're speaking about energy that anybody has, regardless of how they identify. Anybody can have. So the masculine tends to favor individualism. Uh, Justice and mercy continuum is more about justice for the masculine. The compassion and wisdom is more about wisdom. Intimacy and solitude is more about the solitude. So it's more of an agentic, moving through the world and getting it done kind of energy as an individual. The feminine tends toward more of a relational, community-oriented, in the justice mercy continuum, more about mercy than justice, and tends towards more compassion than wisdom. And again, these are tendencies. I tend not to view them as, if you're exhibiting the feminine, you're locked into this. So I like to just speak about tendencies. And traditionally, historically, over hundreds, if not thousands of years, you can see evidence of these tendencies. And that's why they became, we call them stereotypes, but they're at some level, I believe they're both cultural attributes, and there's some grounding in biological realities over centuries. And that gets into a whole other conversation. But basically, individual versus relational, justice versus mercy, wisdom versus compassion. Those are the polarities that exist in the separate, the mistakenly separate. Look at the feminine and the masculine. So was that clear? Because I kind of rambled a bit there. Does that make sense, King?
That's the answer I was looking for, which brings the question now as we talk about the integration. So what you're saying is that you want to be merciful in your fight for justice? Is that what the goal would be, using those two opposite polar polarities? I'm sorry.
So I have one real quick example of that, if it's okay. And then I think, Leslie, you looked like you were bubbling up too there, so I'll turn it to you. But so currently, and this is something I addressed briefly in the book, but it's evident in the news a lot. In I'll say the far left, so the liberal attempt to manifest true equality for all. In other words, the Constitution gave us conceptual equality for all, and it hasn't really been manifested in practice in this country yet for everyone. Often in the far left's attempt to get that equality, an equality that I agree with 100%. I want that. We need it. It's important. They often show no mercy for those people they think are responsible for their own lack of equality. And traditionally, that tends to be, and with some good evidence for it, heterosexual, cisgendered white men. That's the easy category to point to. The problem with painting that, having no mercy toward them, from where I'm sitting, it's not about me personally, although it does impact me, especially if you're older, because I'm an older one of those. I would argue that one of the reasons that Donald Trump got elected in 2016 was because for the better part of 2 decades prior to the 2016 election, maybe 3 decades, that a lot of good working class white men who were married to good working class white women who were raising their kids, many of whom saw their jobs go overseas or become automated, they constantly heard that they were to blame for the state of America. And all they were doing was trying to make a living and raise their kids. So when somebody came along and said, I'm not one of those Beltway insiders, I'm a successful businessman, and I alone can fix this. And he was the stereotype of the wealthy white men who really did a lot of the damage. A lot of people voted for him who maybe wouldn't have. So So I could give an example from the right as well. The examples from the right tend to be more popular and out there in the news. But that example where it was, I described it as an unskillful attempt to do a good thing. It just lumped all of these people into one category, and people who were decent people just trying to take care of their families felt as though they were being blamed for the ills of the country while they were losing their jobs and their homes. So that was a really unskillful attempt, that attempt to get justice, which showed no mercy for the alleged, and I put alleged in quotation marks, the alleged enemy or opponents. All of those lower middle class, lower income white folks could have been brought on board as opposed to alienated. I think, again, I could back that up with a lot more information, but I think I've said enough. So I'll put a period there. Did that make sense?
It did. So I wanted to give Leslie an opportunity because she wanted to chime in on that.
Well, I did, and then you took a turn, and I'm trying to see if I've got something to go with you on that turn. When you compare that example that you just gave to what I would call the more successful social movements, what you're saying is actually in the fight for the feminine, the left actually wielded basically a masculine, no mercy kind of strategy. And it actually backfired. Not a surprise, because the masculine can't be healthy without the feminine, and there wasn't that there. And so we ended up with this hyper masculinized government, right? But when you look at other huge important movements, Martin Luther King, Gandhi, those were some powerfully confrontive movements that were rooted in love, rooted, informed. Name a movement that we all agree at some level was something admirable and something that moved us forward in a real way. You will see the presence of love no matter how much agency occurred. I think about, well, anyway, I'll stop there.
It's interesting, not to make this conversation all about politics, but politics is really easy for people to really kind of, use as examples. And I was thinking about when you both were talking about how we've gotten to the point in this country where just by aligning yourself with one particular party is so divisive nowadays, where it didn't used to be that case in the past. Like, for example, they have now a Republican dating app that have come out. So because Republicans have complained that while they're on dates, they mention the fact that they work for Trump. That, again, this was some of the men that said this example, that they mentioned the fact they work for Trump, that the women would just walk out the restaurant, so just abruptly end the date. And so now they've created a dating app where they can connect with other folks who are more in line with them. And I know even myself, I'm an advocate behind creating what I call connectionally intelligent tribes to align yourself with people whose purpose and principles are in line with yours, that supersede, I should say, race, gender, politics, religion, and all these other divisive labels they put on us to divide us. So now, and going through that process, and Reggie, I kind of want to, now I'm being more conscious, aware of my actions and behaviors, that I don't, as you say, make sure I'm advocating for justice without the mercy being there. Because as the engineer in me, and I'm a very logical thinking person, I'm a very on or as off type thinking. So my point is, if a person's behavior is negative, I just don't want you around. I'm not looking to try to change your mind or make ways to bring you into the fold and help you become more conscious. It's just, I want to just move you away or avoid you altogether. Like I use an analogy like a pothole. I'm just going to drive around you as opposed to trying to stop and fill the pothole and make the world better. I'm just going to go around you. So my question now, with all that being said, am I displaying some of that going for justice without being merciful in that context?
Yeah, I mean, so I wouldn't in this conversation. I'm not going to say, yeah, you better fix that, King. I mean, I'm not. But what I want to say though is what you just. I mean, the last whatever it was, 60 to 90 sample. Coming at it from a systems engineering perspective, and self-reflecting publicly. We don't have millions of people listening, but perhaps there'll be some. That's exactly the necessary move that we talked about at the top of the conversation to begin the process of integration. Oh, I do that in this scenario. I drive around that pothole. I'm not really interested in filling it in so the next person doesn't have to drive around it and maybe get in a head-on collision going into the other lane. And so by stopping to, I'm going to just take the metaphor a little bit further, even though it was your metaphor. So by stopping to either put up a sign, caution, big pothole, and then even filling it in, making sure it's safe, that's more of a feminine move because it's saying, oh, relationship, there's other people that might fall into that pothole or break their axle or get a flat tire, whatever it happens to be. So, but the first move has to be what you just did yourself, King, and which I need to keep doing myself. I could tell a lot of stories like the one you just told about my own. Oh, I just did that, and I'm the one that's supposed to know better. Is just being self-aware and beginning to make the move. So how can I be more inclusive, more relational with that person who's so negative, and I just want to drive around them? Not that we always have an obligation, because we can't fix other people.
Right.
But we can provide a container in which they might be able to see themselves more clearly and maybe ask some questions and get curious, where we can, maybe provide some answers, not so much answer their questions, but respond in a way that deepens their curiosity and expands their, prospective worldview. So that's the goal. What you just did for me is what I talk about in the last two chapters of the book is paying attention to myself, each human being. What's going on with me? Am I walking my talk? How much of this is really grounded in love? In the last chapter talks about various iterations of love. That's the move, and you just did it. So the masculine move, just to finish this, would be to say to you, which I would never do this. I would have done it 30 years ago, probably, but not now. I would said, yeah, King. I mean, if you're just going to dismiss that negative person, you're part of the problem. And come on, get with it. Right? That's a masculine move. I think I made a move that was more informed by the feminine to say, wow, that was an example. And I wasn't trying to do this. I was just being honest. That was a great example of what we're talking about, bringing that awareness to oneself. And then once the awareness is there, if it's, it's just a matter of, staying attuned to it, I believe, and seeing what's true, and adjusting as needed, knowing I'm not going to change overnight, but I can take these little baby steps of, little incremental, changes. And that's how I think one-way transformation can really take place.
I'd like to weigh in on this as well, which is, for me, I agree with Reggie entirely. That the most powerful thing you did there, King, was you asked the question. The asking the question is a doorway to uncertainty and vulnerability, both of which are healthy aspects of the feminine. So the question itself is a feminine move that invites the feminine, because now you're sitting in I don't know. And part of the unhealthy masculine is, I absolutely know how it is. I absolutely know how the world is. I absolutely know, and I am absolutely right. And that is, so to me, you just made the circle of the feminine bigger inside yourself just by dint of the question.
Well, thank you for that. You had mentioned before about the movements of the civil rights movement, Gandhi and King, and you said both of those were rooted in love. And it takes me back to a salesman, a great salesman who was a great salesman trainer as well, Og McDino, and he once said, "Do all things with love." And to me, that's a very simple thing to remember. And I always ask myself at the end of, whether it's the end of the day or end of the week, when I go through my reflection and then say, did I do everything in love? And I know that's pretty much almost impossible to do all things with love, but that's the goal. That's the journey that you're on. And you always want to kind of pivot. It's like they say, when you're flying to the moon, you don't just fly in a straight shot. And once you're locked in, you're just there. You have to get off course and get back on course, and you have to right yourself. And for me, and that's where I see the importance of coaching come into play. The coaches kind of help you get right. Make sure that your blind spots that you're not seeing are being pointed out, an accountability partner. So I'm saying all this to say, because now I'm really, as we move into like the second hour of the second half, I should say, of our conversation, is now about how to become, because you talked about the consciousness, the first part, right? Being aware. Now the self-actualization, and now the growth mindset. So how do we begin to employ both of those type steps would you recommend in that context?
Yeah. So the way I think about it, so if we're talking about trying to integrate masculine and feminine in a way, which by the way, is a completely unique process for each person, right? Because we start with a different mixture to start with, and we're in a different context that has its own requirements. So the context also has a lot to do with the kind of move that we're called to make. Does that make sense? Just to start? Yeah. So for me, that process, I have kind of three different steps of it. The first one is what I call lean. The second one is toggle, and the third one is braid. And so let's say I am let's say that I'm embodying an unhealthy degree of the masculine, and that the feminine is too faint in my way of being. First, I actually have to land in the masculine. First, I actually have to take stock of where I am and what's amazing about it, and what potential lies there, to really explore the healthy aspects of my masculinized side, right? And then I also have to then look at what's beyond, what's so not quite so healthy, what's not serving me about that. But we're not asking anybody to give up the masculine, right? We have to actually bow and have gratitude and harvest what we have. So that's the lean part. The toggle part is, once I start getting that awareness, is to say, okay, King, how do I learn how to stand in vulnerability for longer? These small moves, these small practices, your practice of gratitude is a massive feminine practice, right? Because it doesn't put me at the center of the universe. It makes me say, oh, I'm actually vulnerable to whatever the universe gives me. I'm not in charge of this thing, and I have to be grateful for what is given. So there's this toggling where I can start to feel into more of the feminine, but I'm still kind of code switching between, oh, am I supposed to be nice today? Am I supposed to be hard today? And so that process looks really wonky for a while, because now you're kind of switching in and out of the two modes. But the stronger the feminine gets with practice, which is where coaching comes in so well, I think, those two start to find each other. There starts to become a marriage. And so that's the braiding part. So if you think about braiding hair, you can't actually when it's braided together, you can't tell which strand is which. But they come together and form an incredible tensile strength that neither one of them had by itself. Mm. And so a third way happens. What I will say is, as Reggie pointed out at the beginning, very few of us are actually as braided as we could or should be, I think. All of us, to the day that we die and beyond, are working on this braiding of the masculine and feminine. I think Carl Jung would say that that is our lifelong longing and hope as growing people, in the growth mindset, is to make that braid together. And that takes time. And I don't think there's a magic formula in there. I think you actually have to sit with the discomfort of the toggling between the two. And so do the people around you. They're like, well, which Leslie is showing up today? Like, is it mean Leslie? Is it really nice? Like, ooh. So it joggles everything in the system. But just the presence of more feminine has immediate healing effects. And I found this, for example, in both of those clients that I coached. Just one day when an executive shows up and doesn't bite your head off is a moment of healing. And so everybody starts to shift. The executive starts to shift, the people around her, or the head of the family. It doesn't have to be in a work context, right? So I will start there and let Reggie do what he does here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to really either add to that or other than to just repeat it. So lean, toggle, and braid. I mean, I don't think I've heard that before. And if you've said it to me before, I apologize for not remembering it. but yeah, I mean, that's just a great example. What I'd like to do, I mean, a great way because you can't snap your fingers and do this.
Right.
And the images of leaning, all right, toggling back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and then gradually then braiding. I mean, that's just so clear. I mean, who wouldn't want to be trained as a coach by this woman? Jeez. But what I'd like to do is just throw one concrete example of the work that we, in terms of the subjugation of the women part that's still out there.
Yes.
If that's okay, just to throw that in. It happened in the 2021 or 2020, I forget. I think it was 2021 NCAA basketball tournament. And this wonderful female basketball player in the tournament. And I haven't looked at her story for a while now. I think her first name was Sedona. Her last name was Prince, Sedona Prince. And I'm guessing it was the University of Oregon, I think, was where she was from. I apologize to her and her school if I got that wrong. But she noticed that the facilities at the women's NCAA tournament, and this was during COVID, were very different. The training facilities very different from what the men got. And the men's tournament, I mean, the NCAA and the NFL are two of these multi-billion-dollar, associations. They're actually not for-profit organizations that have wield huge power. But the NCAA specifically, and so she took a video, and the weight training room at the women's tournament was this space. It's not funny, but the visual was hysterical. It was one weight rack, a pyramid weight rack with 12 dumbbells on it. So 12 dumbbells on one weight rack. The men's facility had close to 24 huge weight training stations, both free weights and things like Nautilus and Cybex machines. And so the NCAA responded. She did this video on social media, and it was powerful, striking. And the NCAA responded by saying, well, it was a matter of space, not money. We didn't have the space at the women's facility. So the next thing she did was she videotaped all of the open space at the women's facility. And she basically said, well, it wasn't the problem with space. You just didn't think that women needed the same thing that men get automatically. That had a major impact. It didn't finish the work toward equality in women's collegiate Division I sports, but had a major impact. I mean, she embarrassed this huge organization, and she did it with humor. So it was actually cool. So the reason I like that example is that's an example taken from an elite, socially visible venue. In other words, the number of Division I basketball players, men or women, is a really small number contrasted with the number of student athletes throughout the country. So my question became, all right, if that inequality exists in this socially visible, elite example of competition, what's going on in all of the places that we can't see, from the local, boys and girls clubs through the local grammar schools and middle schools and high schools, et cetera, in terms of the manifestation of Title IX, which was actually part of a Civil Rights Act. It wasn't about sports, but Title IX was the most socially visible aspect of that. So there's still a lot of work to do with regard to that part where men and women in similar or identical roles in our society are not treated or funded equally. So that's just, I just wanted to put that more concrete thing out there, because our conversation, the underlying conversation is really important about what we mean by feminine and masculine and how we can begin to integrate it. Here's one example among many that I think is it's hard to argue because it was just a real clear inequality.
And I see that every day in the workplace. I see the requirements, the stylistic requirements, the emotional requirements, the incredible amount of background work that women are asked to put in that men aren't. So here we're pivoting from the masculine and feminine to this thing about men and women and getting your feet off our necks. Thank you very much. And so I think it's important it's tricky, right, to put those two together. But I think there is a real, this subjugation of women, the subjugation of the feminine itself. It goes up and down that side of the scale, which is we don't know what to do with it. We're afraid of it. We under-resource it. We undervalue it. And to the detriment of virtually every system that we can see.
You really tapped into my favorite, I would say, topic, systems, right at the end of that. And Reggie has heard me say this several different times. That's why I'm an advocate of not changing the systems, but creating new systems. Because every time we try to change a system, if it's already built off old racist biased behavior, it's so integrated throughout that entire system that just trying to change one aspect will have detrimental effects in some other areas. And we see that through education, we see that through healthcare, we see that through the financial, and so on and so forth. So I just want to throw that in there as far as my advocacy, as far as creating new systems. Now, if we're saying that we've grown as a society and we're no longer going to behave in this manner that we've behaved before, why not realize that we got to just really create new systems and give everybody input? Because I really don't see how you can create equality in systems that was never created to be equal to begin with, right?
Yeah.
So I just kind of want to throw that in. I know we're getting there at the top of the hour, and I really want to give some kind of closing thoughts. So Leslie, what would be some closing thoughts you would have about today's conversation that you might want to share our listeners audience?
First, I want to say, when it comes to systems change, triple amen. And since every one of our existing systems grew out of an acorn of fear of the feminine, when we're planting the new acorn that's going to give rise to the new system, before we build the system, we got to make sure that it is coming from an equality mindset. And I think we're failing in that still. I think we are creating new systems, and the same dynamics keep arising because we haven't addressed what's in the shadow. So I fully agree with what you say, and it has to be done with such intentionality. And I think that's the kind of intentionality that you in the conscious business movement are trying to bring so beautifully. And I think I mostly at this moment, I'm so struck with the multidimensional chess of this, the intersection of men and women and the masculine and feminine, and how they come together in men, in women, in people who are gender fluid, and then how that manifests then in systems. And and so I appreciate anybody who shows up to even make little dents of understanding in this terrain. And Reggie, I really want to bow to you in the clarity of your work and your ability to parse one thing from another, and to both say they're different from each other and they're connected and interrelated. It's really, I think this is some of the slipperiest territory to navigate. And I want to bow to the contribution I think that you've made in trying to clarify the territory and the work to be done in it. And King, I want to just bow to this incredible space that you create for conversation, your incredible commitment to consciousness, to waking up, um, and to be guided in all things by love. So it's an honor to be here and part of this conversation in some small way.
Thank you. Thank you. I received that very well. Appreciate that. Reggie, any closing thoughts you might have?
Yeah, just really quickly, I want to echo part of what Leslie just said, but I think to the extent I'm still learning about the nuts and bolts of it, but I just want to say to you, King, and thank you, Leslie, for your kind words about my work, but the work, King, that you're doing in Baltimore City, has this, in my view of it, has this healthy masculine, we're going to do this, we're going to get it done, but it's grounded in what I would say is a really healthy feminine of inclusion, of educating people, of bringing in capital, of making sure that it's not going to just be throwing money at something and then walking away from it, but it's building a community. So, I mean, your work outside of, the podcasts, what you're doing in Baltimore is, I think, a great example of this attempting to integrate and balance the masculine and feminine. So, we spend a lot of time talking about the book and the concepts therein, which I appreciate. But I don't think it's any accident that you're interested in what I wrote in the book, because you're kind of living it. I want to just make sure I say that, to you in this moment as well.
Well, thank you. Thank you both for your kind words and things that you're saying. And you all are the reasons why I do the podcast and when I'm doing the Baltimore, because at the end of the day, what I'm advocating and what I want to show the world, to part of the title of your book, in this country, we live on these false narratives around race, around religion, around gender, around politics, all these things. And until we can get to the point where we can actually start to co-create and have these kind of conversations, nothing will ever change. And that's the purpose of doing the podcast, of advocating the work in Baltimore City, is to bring tangible results. That's something that people can actually see, touch, and actually engage. And we're not going to do everything right initially, but if we stick with those three things of being conscious, self-actualization, and having a growth mindset, then we can always improve and get better. And I know we reached the top of the hour, but I definitely don't want to end the show without each of us just kind of sharing who we believe to be someone who's exhibiting fully human connections behaviors, whether they could be someone in the past or someone current, who we feel that exhibits those today.
I'll jump in quickly. So I'm just going to mention that's actually the person to whom the book is dedicated is my first cousin, Christine Washington. And in a nutshell, this is not going to do her justice, but she's in Alabama now. She went down to the South in the late 60s, early 70s, was a Vista worker. She met a man named Caliph Washington, who was African American. She was a Catholic New Yorker, Italian American, and they fell in love. They got married, had six beautiful kids. He died in 2001, but she kind of embodies this love and courage that, like, I'm probably 6 or 7 years younger than she is, which I just always admired her from, not from afar, because I knew her. I mean, she's my cousin, but she just has this, like, was living the real thing, talking about love and courage. And she doesn't see herself in that way. She's unassuming in that way, but talk to her kids and her grandkids now, and it's really clear. So I just wanted to, say, Christine, Luna was her given, her maiden name, but Christine Washington is my exemplar for today. Yeah.
Leslie, would you have anybody in mind? Thank you for that, Reggie, by the way.
I do. I have two people, and I want to call out a man and a woman on this integration. First one is Reverend William Barber, who is just a powerful, powerful prophetic voice, with a heart and a body and a soul as big as the world, and looks to be really beautifully integrated. The other one is Jacinda Ardern, Prime Minister of New Zealand, who, when there is a threat to her people, she takes swift, unequivocal, unpopular action to say, I will do whatever it takes to protect you. So that incredible combination of love and ferocity. I want to hold both of them up.
All right. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for that. And mine, I would say, I want to add quickly is it'd be Viktor Frankl. I just believe that Viktor has been someone who has shown example of forgiveness, true forgiveness, what that looks like, not to hoard hate when you have every reason to, logically, if you want to look at it from a logical perspective, but just Man's Search for Meaning, the book, and then his work with logotherapy. I just think that if people begin to connect with their meaning in life, you don't have time to hate. You don't have time to be involved with these other, I would say, negative energy sources. And you can really look to tap into both your masculine and feminine energy to make a much better life as you pursue what that purpose is, to bring meaning to life in that context. So I just want to throw Viktor Frankl, because I'm reading from him every day. I learn from him every day. And it's just another one of my, I would say, mentors that keeps me grounded and on the path of love. So with that being said, again, I want to thank Reggie, co-host, for joining me today, bringing the energy, writing the book, always bringing the right state of mind for the conversation. Leslie, thank you for joining us today as well. Your input, your counsel, your wisdom, and things you shared have just really been very fruitful and beneficial to our conversation. And then I want to thank our listening audience for tuning in to the Fully Human Connections podcast that we do each Wednesday. And we have one more week to discuss this feminine energy. And Reggie, your book is out right now, right? Just wanted to make sure
it is available. You can ask your local bookseller to order it, or you can get it from Amazon and buy it often and early.
Absolutely. It definitely can be something that's going to help people begin to think differently and hopefully put people on the mindset and on the journey of self-discovery, self-actualization. So again, thank you everyone for listening again, your investment of time and energy. This has been a Fully Human Connections podcast. Until next Wednesday, we want to wish everyone a blessed and productive week. Thank you.